I think first and foremost, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you giving us 45 minutes on a Wednesday to chat with you about turnover and some strategies to tackling that messy problem that is turnover. We'll do some introductions and then cue up the presentation and dive right in. My name's Craig Ellis. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist with HighMatch. I lead the assessment services team, and also here from HighMatch is Sarah. I'll let Sarah introduce herself.
Yeah, afternoon, everybody. So I am the Chief Revenue Officer here. I lead our sales and our success team. So I often try to provide a lot of good insights in terms of what we're hearing from the market that you can probably relate to as we talk through our topic of turnover today.
Yeah, so this is I think the sixth installment in a monthly series of webinars that we do on challenges facing HR and talent acquisition teams. And so, really appreciate you attending this one. At the end, we'll, have some links to our former ones, and certainly we also invite you to look out for the ones that are coming. So, a little bit about, kind of roadmap for the conversation today. And so we'll cover some content. I'll lead us through, some of the places you should be looking and some of the things you should be considering as you try to resolve the turnover problem. Once we get through that, Sarah will detail some of the specific, case studies and client issues that we've seen and helped resolve. And then stick around at the very end because there will be links to join and grab some time on the I-O team's calendar if you want to talk about the specific issues your organization is facing without a sales agenda, or if you're in a place where, maybe you are looking for a partner or a platform or a product to help you deal with some of the challenges that you're having. Certainly you can book on our sales team, and Sarah would be more than excited to talk with you about that.
Absolutely.
So we'll dive in, and again, thank you so much for joining us. If you have questions throughout, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll reserve some time at the end to answer them, and so just know that we are seeing those as they come in. So I think first and foremost, one of the things that I think we like to say is that most organizations don't have a vice president of turnover, right? So meaning that they know that it's a problem and all of these different departments are being impacted by the problem, but there's not a single person who's in charge of digging into it and figuring out why it's happening and what potential remedies might be or what interventions an organization could do to try to resolve the issue. And so in order to fully understand what the problem is and how to solve it, you've got to get comfortable with the idea of wrapping your head around multiple sources of data and multiple approaches to understanding why that problem is happening. The reality is that turnover is messy. There are a lot of different reasons that it happens, and we'll get into some of those in a moment. And in order to fully resolve it, you've got to make sure that you understand the root cause, and then design strategies and interventions and approaches that are really aimed directly at those different causes that might exist. And so, we think about addressing turnover as a framework, and, marketing likes 3 steps. So, this one has 3 steps along with an iteration down at the bottom. But I do think it's an accurate representation of the way that you've got to think about this problem in order to develop, a solution that's going to work and is actually going to drive down that turnover rate that your managers are saying is a problem. And so, it always starts with what we would call a learning phase, a digging phase, an understanding phase, where you want to try to figure out as best you can why employees are leaving, right? And so oftentimes organizations, they look at exit interviews or they talk to managers and they say, hey, explain to us why you're leaving this job. Managers, why are your employees leaving? And exit interviews are excellent sources of turnover data, but they're often not telling the entire story, right? Occasionally your trainers will have really useful insight. And so you can go and look at training data to understand the kinds of folks who are getting through training versus the kinds of folks who aren't. In some cases, there are issues with screening interviews or hiring manager interviews. Maybe there's a lack of structure in the interview process that is causing hiring managers to hire the wrong candidates. You queue up 3 for them, and they magically every time seem to choose the worst one, right? And so although turnover looks like a post-hire problem, it actually has a pre-hire cause. And so we always sort of recommend setting some time aside to investigate and to dig and to ask questions or host focus groups or look at internal HRIS data that your organization might gather around the reasons for turnover. One of the most enlightening exercises that we've ever done, and that I think I would certainly recommend you do, is going row by row on your turnover data and looking at the reasons that candidates are leaving. Oftentimes what happens is an HRIS system or a data analysis team will categorize these turnover reasons. And so you'll see a lot of no call, no shows and personal family reasons and, better compensation or transportation issues. And you get these buckets and the categories that are informative on their own. But the real story, the devil's in the details. The real story is in looking at those instances and becoming the VP of turnover at your organization to be able to speak knowledgeably and intelligently about why you're losing people and when you're losing people. And so much of this addressing this problem happens in the learning phase, right? Turnover, I have 4 young kids, turnover is an octopus, right? It's got tentacles, right? And those tentacles sprawl in different directions. And so in order to fully understand this problem, you've got to look at it as 8 different issues potentially, and all require, some attention. Once you understand the problem and you're an expert on your turnover, that's when you can actually, intelligently and thoughtfully design some sort of intervention or process adjustment or change, what we would call a build, to impact that specific issue. And we'll get into, what some of those interventions might look like. Once you've launched an intervention and you deploy it and it's active, then you want to evaluate, right? You want to know, what are we trying to impact? What are the specific causes of turnover that we want to see reduced based on this intervention that we've applied? And then that allows you to revisit every 4 or 6 months and iterate on your solution. And so, there are a few strategies, in this learning phase that I think I would always recommend you consider. I think the first one, and we'll get into more details, is a really deep understanding of what your hiring process, what candidates your hiring process is serving up. Like who are the candidates who are, rising to the top of the funnel? Are those the right candidates? Are those the ones that you actually want to hire? Are those the ones that end up being successful employees? When are your candidates washing out? Right. So we make candidates offers and they accept, and then we never see them again. Okay. Well, that tells us something about our hiring process. Right, we're losing something right there at the end. We get them all the way to the offer stage, they say yes, and then we don't ever see them again. Okay, that's something that needs to be addressed. And so ultimately, a big part of this learning phase is understanding, why are you hiring the candidates that you're hiring? Why are they leaving? Now let's go back and see if we can make some adjustments and refinements to our hiring process to ensure that we're serving up the right candidates, the best candidates who are going to be successful and who are going to stick. And so, label whatever you want. I love the phrase process audit for something like this, because if you think about the hiring process, right, most organizations think about it as like 2 or 3 stages. But within those 2 or 3 stages, there are a lot of potential, interventions or strategies or even data points that you're gathering, right? So your candidates go through an application process. And they view a job posting. Is your job posting realistic? Is it giving them a clear picture of what the job's going to look like? Are the candidates who actually get through application the ones you want? Or are your good candidates seeing the application and, after spending 20 minutes on it, they're not sticking with it? And so ultimately, once you understand some of the root causes of turnover, now we want to go back and look at our hiring process and ask the question, well, are there things within this process, that are creating turnover issues that we could solve just by making some enhancements or adjustments, right? One of my favorite examples here is, we work with a lot of organizations who talk about the friction between the recruiting teams and the managers in the field, right? And so the managers say, well, you're serving us up the wrong candidates. And the recruiters say, we're giving you great candidates. You're doing a really poor job of managing them. And one of the first places that manifests that organizations don't often think to look is the interview, right? The hiring manager interview, whenever they get through and they say, I interviewed this candidate that you said was great, and they were terrible. Okay, so why is that happening? Like there's probably some work that we can do on interview quality or, communication throughout the hiring funnel, the hiring process that can be used to, improve upon hiring rate, hiring batting average, and then reduce turnover after the fact. And so, these are just some examples of whenever you go through that learning phase and you're starting to dig, some of the things that you might want to dig into. Are your interviews scored? Are you removing bias by asking the same questions of every candidate within a given job category? Where are candidates washing out? Are you having significant no-call, no-shows? Are you having candidates who show up for training, they get all the way through the 8 to 5 training, and then whenever it's time for them to start their shift, they stop showing up, right? And so there are a lot of different, kind of nuanced data points that if you go through and audit your hiring process and you look at where the turnover is happening, you can start to get a clear picture of the why and then some potential ideas for how to go in and address it through an intervention or process change. Okay, so let's imagine, you are your organization's VP of turnover. You've gone and you've done your digging, and now you realize, hey, I've got some insight into why our people are leaving, right? I went and looked at exit interview data, and what we see is that the people who leave within the first 45 days, when we ask them why they're leaving, what they're saying is this job isn't what I thought it was going to be. It's not what I expected. All right. And so now what you do is, okay, well, how do we resolve that issue? How do we ensure that their expectations when they start the job are consistent with what they're going to experience when they get on the job? Right. And so that would be like a realistic job preview, either walking them through a site or presenting them with a video, ensuring that whenever they say yes to your offer, that they know what they're signing up for. And we would always recommend using that strategy if a significant cause of turnover is misaligned expectations. So candidates get in the organization within 30, 45 days, they're saying, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, and they're turning over. Realistic job previews are built to solve that problem, to bring into alignment of expectations. It could be that, your candidates are getting in and they're saying, well, I know you told me what the pay was going to be. Like, I know that was in the application, but now that I'm on this job, the pay is not what I wanted it to be or what I would expect for the kind of work that I'm doing. Okay, so now go back to your hiring process. How much are we talking about the pay rate in this role? How much are we talking about how raises are determined or how often they're given? How often are we talking about your ability to gain overtime or to switch shifts? Right. And so if you know that people are leaving because they're misunderstanding how they're paid, okay, well, let's bring some clarity to the pay rate before we hire them. In some cases, a couple more examples. In some cases, you might have candidates who look like great candidates. They perform excellently in interviews. They've got a great background and work history. And then they get into training and they can't survive the training. Right, either because they don't have the prerequisite knowledge or ability, or maybe they don't have the intellectual tools to handle classroom style training, and that's how your training is delivered. Okay, well, that tells us that we need to evaluate something in these candidates before we hire them to ensure that they have the prerequisite competencies and abilities and aptitudes to survive our training and actually get on the floor and become productive employees. And so the key kind of point here is that before you go in and design a solution or an intervention or an approach, you need to understand the issue that is causing the turnover. You have to match the solution to the problem. Otherwise, you might invest time and energy and money into a solution that solves turnover, but doesn't solve the reason for turnover at your organization. And so now you've implemented a solution that isn't even addressing the problem that you're trying to solve. And so this is a good example of, again, the octopus, right? And this one has 6 legs. There are others that we could put here. But just to kind of drive this point home, right? At the root cause of turnover, right? Turnover is a symptom of different causes, right? And so it could be job expectation issues. And if it's job expectation issues, like we mentioned, we want to look at a realistic job preview. It could be training issues. And if it's training issues, we want to look at the content of the training. Is the training right? Are we training them on the right things? Are we training them on the skills and the knowledge that they'll need on the floor? And if so, and people are failing, okay, so now we're not higher. Our training is good. Their expectations are accurate. Our problem is that people aren't surviving training. Okay, so we need to assess for things that are going to help people survive training. In some cases, it's, hey, we hire people, they're great candidates, they get through the training, and then they get on the job. And whenever we check their performance at 60 days, they're consistently under our target KPI. Okay, so there are qualities that your candidates need to have in order to hit their metrics that they lack, right? And so, for instance, if they're a warehouse, order filler, and they're making consistent mistakes, right? They're not matching the material to what's on their order form, right? We might have a detail orientation problem. Or if they're having trouble navigating the warehouse, we might have a spatial reasoning problem. But again, I'll drive this point home one more time. If you really want to solve the problem, you've got to match the solution to the right cause for turnover. And the reality, I think, of this is that oftentimes the way that we impact turnover effectively is by shaving 2 or 3 percentage points off of all of these different reasons, right? So, well, we know 30% of our early tenure turnover is due to misaligned expectations, all right? Realistic job preview, we shave that 30 down to 18, right? So we've handled 12% of that root cause of turnover. And then we've also got these people who can't survive training. So expectations are right, interviews are good, they get on the job, they can't survive training. Okay, so let's implement maybe a skills assessment or a knowledge test pre-hire to ensure that they have the requisite knowledge, right? And so now we've taken that 20% of folks who can't survive training and we've shaved that down to 7% or 8%, right? Okay, now we've got managers on the job who, for whatever reason, these specific managers carry a lion's share of the turnover within their employee base, within their direct reports. Okay, so we probably need to do some training to these managers on onboarding and being patient as people come along. Okay, and so now we've taken that 20% of our turnover problem is due to mismanagement of new employees. We've done some training and some coaching, and now we've lowered that from 20% down to 14% or 13%. And so the idea is that in order to address turnover effectively, you're shaving away turnover caused by all of these different issues with a solution that includes multiple strategies. So if we just did a realistic job preview, for instance, we're going to do really good at addressing that misalignment of expectations, but we're going to miss on the people who aren't surviving training. We're going to miss on the new personnel management issues that we talked about. And so whenever we come back and we look at, is our solution effective? It's going to look less effective than it is in reality because it's solving the problem that it's built to solve, but all of these other tentacles aren't addressed at all. And so the depth with which you understand your turnover problem equips you to solve it effectively. And then last point here, and then I'll, pass it over to Sarah for a bit, and then we'll cover some case studies of how we've seen this problem addressed historically. I think one of the biggest shortcomings of talent acquisition, HR initiatives often is a misstep in tracking the success rate of those interventions, of those changes. Right. And so oftentimes what happens is we do a lot of work. I'm going to back up a few slides here. And I know our marketing team is probably cringing watching me do this. It's okay. Just stick with me. You designed a great presentation. This little iterate arrow down at the bottom here What that means is that after you deploy your solution, which is probably a great solution because you spend a lot of time analyzing, you spend a lot of time thoughtfully building out your interventions, and okay, so now we're gonna shove it away from the doc. But you don't want to shove it away from the doc never to see it again. It's like, no, what's going to happen is you're gonna deploy it, you're going to launch it, and then you're going to track it. And you're going to ask, are we addressing effectively? Are we seeing a reduction in early tenure turnover due to misaligned expectations? If not, maybe our realistic job preview isn't balanced enough. Like, we're talking a lot about the positive aspects of the job, but we're not spending enough time talking about the drawbacks of the job. And because we're not spending enough time talking about it, we're not impacting turnover in the way that we wanted to, right? Or maybe you go back and look at it and it's like, well, we saw a slight reduction in training failure, but not to the degree that we thought we would, right? Maybe you're not assessing the right knowledge or the right skill. I'll give an example of this. So we designed a solution set for a client who was having this issue. Folks couldn't survive training. And they had been, previously using a different assessment tool. And they had been using it for 2 years. And what they saw was the assessment tool wasn't actually enhancing their training performance, because what they were measuring was general cognitive ability. And it wasn't that their candidates weren't smart enough to survive training. It was that they weren't literate with computers and terminals and multi-screens. And so they were finding people who were bright, but the bright people that they were finding weren't familiar with machines, navigating computers. And so they found bright people, but those bright people still didn't have the prerequisite knowledge to survive training. And so they were measuring in the right ballpark, but they weren't actually getting the data that they needed to ensure that their candidates who got into training were able to survive training. And so in some cases, and this is the point that I'm trying to make, in some cases, you deploy the right solution, but it needs enhancement and it needs recalibration. And the only way you can track that enhancement and what it needs is to evaluate it post-deployment. For example, right? Whenever you launch a solution, you might, realize through your process audit that only 60% of our candidates are completing the screening questionnaire. And you say, okay, we're going to set a target over the next 4 months to raise that 60% to 85%. And then you go back, you look at your data, and you've made a positive impact, but not to the extent that you hoped. What does that tell you? It tells you that you need to dig and you need to further understand why you're coming up a bit short. And I'm actually going to, pass to Sarah for a few of these, because I know that her team, whenever they get a prospect, in a conversation and they ask, hey, what's the problem that you're having? These are the kinds of things that her team hears a lot. So I'm going to let her dig into this a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Craig. I do want to call out for just a quick moment. I know we've had quite a few friends join a little bit later. We're so excited to have you. Thank you for jumping on. We will share the recording after this. So for anyone that missed a little bit of the beginning, no worries. You'll get an email from our team with the entire presentation. But I kind of want to skim through a handful of these. And I think the biggest point that we'd like to take away from here is from what Craig talked about earlier, right? If you're spending the time to dig into every step of the process, right? And whether it's a turnover framework like the table that he looked at, or one that you've come up with internally, we love to be able to apply metrics every step of the way. And you'll notice that that target is definitely somewhat arbitrary, right? But we're looking to be up and to the right often. And I think more importantly is that 3-month actual that we talk about there. And the biggest piece here that we really partner with during like QBRs and just these constant conversations with our clients is, what were the things that you brought up in the beginning during that turnover kind of evaluation, where we said, we're pointing to this as a problem that we definitely want to solve with assessments, or that we definitely want to solve with, better questions, right? Better process. And then we want to put a metric next to that. And so you'll notice here, right? Like, we're looking at definitely the screening that Craig talked about, but How many interviews are converted to offers, right? Let's put a stake in the ground and then let's look at that again in 90 days. And then certainly in these examples, right, post that individual starting with your company, what do those first 90 days look like, right? Where do we want to put the stake in the ground for overall turnover? Do we want to calculate it every 6 months and then at the 12-month mark? All right, so a lot of the process that we talk through once we've been through that kind of initial understanding is to set those initial baselines, right? And then talk about how we're going to track them at the 3-month mark. So what are we looking at? Do you have that data readily available? Do you need to build a report in your ATS, right? Whatever it may be, we have that big conversation. So it's always beneficial to be kind of forward looking, right? And that way we can, I think specifically to Craig's point, identify the areas where we do want to go back and enhance. Because I will say with a lot of our clients, oftentimes what we find is we exceed expectations in a couple of these areas, right? And so we're going to lock that in and let that keep riding. And then there's areas, right, where it's either a little bit stagnant, right? Or it's barely up and to the right. And those are the ones where we want to go back, reevaluate, go back to the drawing board. So a lot of benefit, I think, to really attaching some strong qualitative data to the solutions that you're implementing. If you'll,
it's such a great point. And I just want to add on to that. I think one of the biggest challenges that people practitioners face is measurement. Like, how do we demonstrate to the organization that we're making a positive impact on something as complicated and complex as, people choosing to leave a job? And so, it's always our recommendation, and it's the standard that we're held to, which is, hey, prove that you made a difference. Show the data that suggests, hey, your intervention was effective. It impacted kind of up and to the right, like Sarah said. But if you set out from the outset to measure this stuff, it's going to make the whole solution so much more effective going forward. Because to Sarah's point, you're going to see, which levers and dials you need to pull and twist to enhance, and which ones you just need to leave alone because there's nothing wrong with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think a really big piece of this, and we obviously do this here, as you've heard Craig share the majority of this presentation, right? And he introduced himself at the beginning. Craig has his PhD in I-O Psychology, right? So he leads the teams that are doing a lot of this kind of turnover framework, the evaluation, certainly the understanding and the build with our clients. But these are individuals, right, who live and breathe assessment science, right? So they are well-versed. This is a problem that kind of sits at the root of their training, of their day-to-day. And so we always recommend, when you have the option, to leverage the knowledge that an I-O psychologist can bring to the table, right? So those are individuals, and we got a couple of the points there, right? Like there are publications, there are conferences, right? There are always advancements that are being made in this field where they are looking into research. They are doing data analysis on everything from the complex, right, as Craig puts it, octopus that is turnover, but also like how do we impact that? And are there new solutions out there that we need to be implementing as we learn? Think about things like, hey, we know that even just being able to access candidates on a mobile device is huge in terms of being able to move them through your process. Right? So you've got IOs that are researching, what does that impact look like, right? How during the process do we meet them where they are while still providing a fair and an effective evaluation of their skills and their behaviors and things of that nature. They can certainly help you deep dive into your data. I know Craig brought up that looking at kind of a baseline in terms of where you're starting is often rather difficult, right? You've got data in a ton of different places. You've got applicant tracking systems. You've got HRIS systems. You've got managers' guts, right? That you're trying to really kind of understand and wrap your head around. You've got maybe halfway decent, feedback from those that have left. So they do a really good job of what we call wrangling data to be able to pull together all of those pieces, right? So that you can start making sense and start to pull together a story of where do we want to focus and where do we want to dive in. And I think most importantly, right, they're the ones that are so well versed in that solution side, right? That as they're starting to work with you to evaluate the turnover and build a really good understanding of where are the gaps in your process, where can you effectively make changes quick, right? Where is it going to be more of a long-term change that you need to make? They're the ones that know what exists out there, what is proven to be the most effective, right? What is going to be specifically the best for the frustrations that you're bringing to the table, and those that can continue to have that conversation with you as you track the progress that you're seeing once you have implemented a solution. So a pitch, certainly, Craig's incredible, but there are firms out there that can certainly help you with that. We definitely recommend leveraging them. So a few case studies. I think it's helpful to kind of see this all in action, right? I think everybody knows turnover. Everybody wants to make some progress here. But we'd love to give you some examples of how we've partnered with our clients to kind of move the needle in terms of seeing that reduction in turnover. So this is one that's actually a massive food distributor. And what they came to us with was what we call like early tenure turnover, right? So they wanted employees that would not only make it through that training, which I believe for them was like a 5 to 6 week process, but would stay on the job past the 30-day mark. They saw a significant amount of individuals that either dropped out during training or didn't come back, after that first 30 days. And so as Craig and team worked with them, right, we went through that same kind of framework that we talked about, where we start from the beginning and we really step through each of their processes, all the way through, obviously, what does training look like? What does being on the floor for 30 days look like? And when we found out that these 4 pieces, as you can see here, are what we're going to start to kind of chip away at that turnover. So certainly a men-qual questionnaire. These are things like, imagine a warehouse, right? So we're asking, do you have reliable transportation, right? Do you understand that the shift is going to be 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., right? So we're getting in front of them from the very beginning to make sure that they align with the qualifications. And I talk about this one a lot because I think we all know about Indeed Quick Apply and all of these ways that you can kind of throw your resume out to 100 jobs that have the right job title. That men-qual questionnaire is a great way to kind of take pause within a candidate and make sure that they did in fact understand the baseline of what you're asking out of them. So we lead with that. We move into a job preview, which I think Craig did an incredible job. We talk about like, hey, this warehouse is cold and it's in Michigan, right? So it's already cold and it's going to be colder for you. There's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of moving pieces. You've got forklift operators kind of whizzing past you, while you're trying to do your picking and do it quickly. And so we do a really good job of making sure that they understand the environment that they're going to be working in and are comfortable doing so. From there, we moved into a behavioral assessment. As you can imagine, with a warehouse picker, attention to detail, the ability to really kind of take in the knowledge that's coming in via headphones and then, put that back into an actual, what am I grabbing? Where am I grabbing? There were a ton of components that made someone effective. And so we were able to include those there. And then off the back of all that data that we gathered, we could provide really effective interview questions so that the hiring managers could really pinpoint where they needed to focus to feel more confident in whether or not that individual could make it through that first 30 days. So definitely a multi-pronged approach. And what you're looking at the top, because it was early tenure turnover, right? We were able to kind of quickly gather data from this client. And they saw a 72% reduction in turnover, which is huge considering where they were coming from. But you'll see that it kind of equates to the dollars in year one, and it can certainly be a massive impact when implemented effectively. So that was one good story. I'll let Craig.
Yeah, that was a really, really fun project. We did a site visit. The I-O team did a site visit for that one. And, one of the things I think that was super interesting about that one was they would describe their warehouse facility as controlled chaos. Like for someone who had never been in there before, you would walk in and think, how are there not just wrecks between, forklifts and, order selectors and all of that stuff. But what they needed were people who had the stress tolerance and resilience to work in that controlled chaos, but still the detail orientation and the conscientiousness to deliver results. And so, to Sarah's point, it was a really, I think, elegant, I'll use the word elegant because I'm a nerd about this stuff, elegant solution to the problem that they were having. It hit on the realistic job preview. It hit on some of those behavioral and knowledge-based elements. And then it served up interview questions to hiring managers to help them make that final decision. So, another example, we partnered with an organization who was doing third-party call center customer support, right? And the way that they positioned this job was an alternative to entry-level retail, entry-level food service that offered a career trajectory in technology and IT, right? So come in, we'll train you on the technology, we'll train you how to deliver support to our customers. And then within our organization, you can grow out of an entry-level position. But one of the challenges that they were having is because they were recruiting out of, food service and entry-level retail, they would have people who came from a job that, by their description was very straightforward, and easy, into a job where there was pressure and there was stress, and they were talking with clients who were, upset on the phone. And so what would often happen is they would get people into the role who were attracted to the role because it paid $1 more an hour or $2 more an hour. But once they got on the job, they would quickly realize that, hey, I think I might just rather go back and accept the $1 or $2 an hour less to go and work at this other organization.
Yep.
So we built out a custom screening process for them to help communicate the key requirements and realities of the job, stop short of building a full realistic job preview video, but spend a lot of time working with their recruiting teams on, hey, this is how you serve up this opportunity to candidates, right? You want to be clear about the realities of the job. You want to be clear about, how quickly pay grows. You want to be clear about this is what training looks like for 3 weeks. It's 8 to 5. If you miss twice, you don't survive. You have to come back to that. Like, you want to be clear about all of that stuff to avoid turnover during training. And so, through that audit process that I showed earlier, we identified 3 or 4 different steps where they could be doing better, frankly. And in addition to that, we implemented an assessment package that included a basic digital literacy assessment to ensure that they could survive the classroom-based training that they were doing on a computer, that they could navigate multiple monitors, that they understood what it meant to minimize a window, right? Just basic things like that, paired with a behavioral assessment to ensure that they had the resilience, the self-assurance to work in an environment where there was going to be criticism, and they were going to be working with difficult people. And so just another example of, the solution is different here, right? 2 very different styles of solutions that included very different components, but the reason that they were different is the causes of turnover were different. And so the causes of turnover informed the solution set that was used to address it.
Yeah.
I think we might have one more here.
Yeah, I was like, I'm going to do something I don't normally do, and I'm so sorry because I'm watching the time and I know we've only got a little bit left, but I highly encourage you to look through this one as we send a follow-up. It was a really great government partner, right, that had a very unique role, and a very different approach to turnover from the other two. So just kind of furthers that home. But I do want to touch on for a quick minute just a little bit about us. I think if you were checking out the website when you registered for this webinar, you probably saw Measure What Matters everywhere. It's our tagline that I think so nicely correlates with everything that we've talked about today. Our whole goal here as an assessment company is to throw out this idea of a one-size-fits-all or the HighMatch assessment and hand it over, and instead really spend time getting to know our clients, really understanding their organization, their culture, the roles that they're struggling with, and what's really contributing to the turnover in those roles, so that we can build an assessment that does just what we've articulated in those case studies, right? It really addresses deeply the problems that you're seeing in each of those roles so that we can truly impact turnover. And that could be during the screening phase, all the way through developing those candidates, right? You've taken the time to get to know them. So how do we use that once you've hired them? So we got a lot of different options here as we partner with our clients. But just wanted to call out that if you are obviously experiencing turnover, right? I think everyone is out there, but if you're at a point where you've said enough's enough, and I'm really ready to kind of dig in and see what I can get in terms of some help and potentially a solution, we'd certainly love to have a conversation with you. I know Craig talked about this at the beginning, but you've got 2 different options. We promise there is the ability to kind of take us up on that recommendation to leverage IOs. Craig has an entire team that would be ready to have a conversation just to better understand what you're looking to accomplish and maybe point you in the right direction, regardless of us and our product. I know we're dropping some links into the chat now. If you are interested in connecting with more of a product specialist because you think that, hey, I know I've got some struggles and it sounds like maybe HighMatch can help, please by all means click the purple button, the pink one, whatever color, magenta. I am not colorblind, but I just glitched. But no, grab that button below, and that'll link you with someone from my team who can definitely chat with you about how we specifically at HighMatch can help you solve some of those frustrations that you're experiencing as a result of turnover. I think Craig also mentioned at the beginning, this is definitely a part of a series. We've done many in the past. So this will be accessible via the follow-up that we send as well. Please, by all means, dive in and listen to any of the previous ones, or please definitely join us on a future webinar. But I do want to take, the last 4 minutes and open it up for questions. Is there anyone that would love us to be able to answer something that specifically you'd like to know? Oh, good. Thanks, Michael. Links are definitely in the chat. So Craig, a question that I will read and hand to you. So this one is, how can we retain skilled labor in construction that have unique physical demands and safety requirements?
Yeah, I mean, one, it's a great question. You know, double-barreled, right? So not only is the job physical, but there are aspects of the job that have standards attached to them, right? And so you have to do them in a safe way. And so I think that there are a couple, generally speaking, a couple of things that we've seen be really important in construction roles. One is that oftentimes within the construction industry, you've got folks who have experience at another organization coming into your organization where the job title might be exactly the same. And so they might presume that the duties and the responsibilities and the standards are exactly the same. But there have been so many times where we've partnered with an organization that says, we're hiring employees that have 5 years of experience in this job. They get onto the job and it looks like they are completely green and they have no sense of what they're supposed to be doing or how to do it safely. And so, I think one of the things that I would always recommend any organization doing, and this is certainly true of construction, is to think about how you're different from your competitors or from the places where your candidates might be coming from, and get really good at articulating those differences as part of the hiring process. In some cases, we've even built assessments around like OSHA knowledge. Like, do they understand how high the railing on the platform has to be, right? And like, do they understand, the specifics of the tool that they're supposed to use, and how to use it safely? And so, I think it's a little bit of both. It's clarity and transparency about the physical aspects of the job, and then evaluating whether, the experience that they have is actually giving them the knowledge that they need to have to be successful. And you can evaluate that through assessments or interviews. And so I think it's, again, thoughtfully figuring out how do you suss these things out during the interview and the pre-hire process.
Perfect. Craig, you're breaking up just a little bit, which is
good
time. It's okay. So one more, how important is the manager relationship with employees?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of data, and I think I've heard this tagline probably a million times that, employees don't leave an organization, they leave their boss.
Yeah.
And the reality is that that's even more true for entry-level positions where there's high volume and, oftentimes, managers, supervisors feel overwhelmed or unprepared. And so, I think the first thing that I would say is, one, it's absolutely important, right? I mean, you want your managers to be good managers, to be good supervisors, to be effective coaches, and to have good relationships, professional relationships with your employees. So much of that goes to promoting the right people into those supervisor positions, right? Oftentimes what organizations are doing, they're saying, well, who's been doing this job the longest? Okay, well, that's the person we're going to promote to the supervisor. But supervisory skills are very, very different than, entry-level task completion skills. And so I think part of that is promoting the right people into those supervisory positions who have the right, prerequisite skills and soft skills and behavioral tendencies that suggest they'll be successful. And then I think the second piece is not assuming that because they've been in the job for a while or they know the organization, that they're going to understand the requirements of a supervisor. So training is super critical. Like, what do you do when an employee comes to you and they're distraught or they're frustrated with the organization? How do you have that difficult conversation? Because yes, those relationships are important. And so, whatever you can do from a hiring or a training standpoint to ensure that the folks who are getting into those supervisory positions are qualified and also prepared, is only going to benefit not only the supervisor, but also the folks who are reporting to that supervisor.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. I want to add one thing, and then I promise I'll close and respect everyone's time. It also kind of really feeds into that turnover framework, right? When we say like, look at everything and then talk about what you can impact. And then more importantly, talk about what you can impact quickly and what's more long-term. And I don't think anyone here would be surprised how often there are a handful of managers that are contributing to turnover. And it's a hard conversation even that we have to have. But we can certainly help to talk about, whether it's, to Craig's point, putting an assessment in place for the leaders as well, or having a little bit more of that like go between, right? So how do we better identify those that are next in line for leadership? Maybe a leadership assessment is a piece of it, or at least, different conversations are happening. But that's one I think that is a little bit more of that long-term goal too, right? Like, how do we better train managers to have better relationships, right? Like, how do we put the right people into that role that are going to build strong relationships? But it's not only, I think, critical, but a critical piece of looking at why individuals are leaving for sure. I don't see any other questions. I just want to thank everyone one more time for jumping on and joining us today. I know we're a couple minutes late. Friendly reminder that we will be sending out the slide deck as well as the recording, and that way everyone's got that to be able to use. If you have any questions, we're here and happy to answer. But otherwise, we hope that you have a fantastic afternoon.
Yep, absolutely. And shameless plug, follow us on LinkedIn so you'll get notified when the next webinars are
Yes,
posted. We always try to send it out to previous attendees, but would love to see you again.
absolutely. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you all so much.